Today we're going to look a little bit more at the number of man. Now man, or Gan, is number 12 in the Tablet of Simoin. We've talked a little bit about this in the past, of what man means, and now we want to further explore some of the meanings of Simoin and man's relationship in it. Since we are human, we're men, male and female, the race. And what exactly does that mean in relationship to the cosmos, to the universe, to all that is, to reality? What we've done so far is we've progressed through Simoin 1 through 11 and then to 12. And this progression was indeed that, a progression, an outward progression, and we related it in terms of cycles and in terms of sets of cycles. And one thing as well that can be done with Simoin is, well, we can not only work forward, but we can work backward as well. And what we find is this backward, or this turning and going that way, is actually a turn toward origin, to go to origin, to return to origin. It says regarding the Panic language, which is what Simoin was given in, the words of the symbols, the names of the symbols, the sounds of the symbols, or the sounds that the soul makes, the soul of the entity, of the concept that's being discussed for that number, for that station, for that position. That sound that goes with it is the sound of the soul form that is with that particular station. And so it says in Oahspe, the Panic language, which was the first language of man, because man spoke by the sounds of the soul, and he didn't really understand soul, but he understood sounds. When he heard sounds, and he would try to reproduce those sounds, and that became the Panic language, or earth language. And it says in Oahspe regarding the Panic language is that to find the origin, you go back to the Panic words to find the origin of things. You can trace words back to their origin, back to their original meanings. And even so, in the sequence of stations, of symbols, of cycles, we can go all the way back to the beginning. And we can work our way to the origin, who is the all-person of the Creator of the universe. And how we do this is we start at 12. The easiest place to start is 12, because we are man, male and female. And so we can go from 12 to 11 to 10 to 9 to 8 to 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And well, what does that mean? That's just words right now. But what it means as far as actually doing it is that we look back, and by looking back we look to number 11. And what's number 11? We describe number 11 as being a reflection of the foundation. And it's more than that. It is a reflection of the foundation when you're looking at a social order, or a project, or a group, or whatever it is that you're looking at to predict or prophesy regarding, and you look to see how well, what their reflection of the foundation is. Now, you can look at it in terms of how their, the reflection of their foundation that they started off with, or the foundation of the entire universe, how are they in relationship to that. But it's more than just a reflection. A reflection is sort of the easy way just to look and you get a quick read on it. But it's also a replication. 11 is also the replication of the foundation. And the replication of the foundation, and that's how come you can look and see how close it is or how distant it is from the foundation itself. Because replication, facsimile, copy, a reproduction, an attempt to manifest outward that inner foundation that one started with. With early man, because he had so much of the beast in him and very little of the spiritual understanding, for him the foundation was essentially in corporea and in darkness and in toward evil. That was essentially the fruits of mankind at that time. And we can read in Oahspe how man developed over the cycles, over the Dan-Hay cycles, through the help of Jehovah's angels, of course, through his kingdom. And progressively he became more and more spiritual and less corporeal. And now we're at a point here in Oahspe where we can balance them. We can balance them where they are, but we still have a lot to develop in spiritual understanding and in spiritual awareness. And this is what the future is about. In the past, for the last measure, 72,000 years, since the time of Sethantes, man has been in the realm, or under the auspices of Cephas. And so it was called the age of Cephas, or the time of Cephas, the season of Cephas. And Cephas is enforced culture, and so you told man what to do. Okay, you got to do this, that, and the other thing. But now we're in Oahspe. In Oahspe, we have reached comprehensive judgment in our soul. And so we don't need to have to be told what to do. We can judge for ourselves, but it's helpful if we can perceive and have all the elements to make up our decision. But even though all this time, most of this time was spent in developing the corporeal man, this time of Cephas, this measure of Cephas, it was to get man so that when he is at this stage of Oahspe, that any development in corporea from here forward is more of a refinement. We have all the basics, all the basic materials and building blocks have been put in place. And so from now forward, we develop the spiritual aspect of man. But we don't ignore the corporeal aspect, but we try to reach the balance all the time. So as we progress spiritually, we also want to balance it out with corporea, with what's going on in our corporeal life. We want our corporeal life to essentially manifest that which is within our spirit. And so Oahspe tells us this is possible, and so does Jehovah's Kingdom. And so does our own direct inspiration, if we can tune into it, to the inspiration of the Creator. That being the case, so it can be possible, because we're individuals as well as a collective person and a collective individual. We're a collective individual compared to a collective individual of another planet, for example, or even of a plateau of Jehovah's kingdom up there, one of his many kingdoms. We can develop sufficiently in our own selves, in our own personal development. We can look back on our own replication, copy, reproduction of the foundation, our manifestation of the foundation. And we can see how we ourselves stack up. And so, do we really represent the fullness of the foundation? So that's our first step, is to try and become the best reflection of the foundation that we can. Like the Holy 11 were in Jehovah's Kingdom, the Lord's, in a past cycle. That's the first step. And then the second step, we come into Susa. Susa, recall, has the uprights and the extremes. So that you have the good and the evil, the good and the bad, the light and the dark, the steady flow and the extreme flows. It's we have to come to terms with that as we look back in our own life, not only in our own life, but with the social order out there and with all of creation. We have to learn to deal, so like in a number 11, when we look back at number 11, we only not have to deal with that in ourselves, like the earth evil, the tetracts, and or whatever it happens to be within ourselves, but within the milieu that we find ourselves, we have to deal with any of that that's out there as well. One of the reasons why, Oahspe, it says, Jehovah says, to separate yourselves from the dominion of from the dominion of Uz, from the dominion of the world's people, from the dominion. Essentially, what they're saying is from the mindset of corporea, of doing things for corporea, and neglecting to feed the spirit and the soul and the mind in healthy ways. And that being the case, so we can work backward from 11 to 10 to 9, we can work our way back. And now, when we do this, when we work backward, we ourselves are the foundation. So when we look backward, we can consider Druk, number 11, to be the an objectivity, the objective look at ourselves, the objective look at the earth evils around us, or the fullness of corporea, if we can attain to that, or if that's been attained to in our surroundings. And of course, that is true to an extent if you're out in the countryside and you have trees growing and birds singing and everything is flowing along nicely and in the fullness of life, essentially. And depending upon the season too, of course. But to objectify something, you recall that that's the second condition. The first condition being the foundation, the going forth. And the second condition is the O that comes out of the and that's the objectivity, the abstraction. And if we stop and think about it, just on a practical level, just on an example of how a straight line can become an arc. Because when you look at number 1, the is the going forth, it's a straight line, and you look at the O, the next condition that comes after it, and it's an arc, it's an arch. And so so one way to look at this is if you take a circle, you draw a circle a bit, and we know this from computer, anybody who's worked in computer and computer graphics, working with a circle, as you increase the size of the circle, then that little place between any 2 points on the circle starts looking like a straight line. So if the arc becomes bigger and bigger, and let's say the arch is the size of the earth, well, if we look out on the sides across an ocean, it's pretty much level, it's pretty much flat. And especially if there's fog out there, so you can't see you have to go out quite a number of miles in order to see the curvature of the earth. But if there's a fog there, your eyes can't go out that far, and you do see a flat level. And so you get your straight line. You can get it that way from the curvature. And similarly, we can consider a straight line as being, on some level, connected to a larger circle somewhere. And that larger circle, or the largest circle of all, being the creator of all. Well, in any event, that's a way that we can that the going forth actually arches. So if you went forth across the earth, flat earth, you would arch all the way back around, ultimately, presuming you could walk on water and all that. So the objectification comes about, recall that in the second condition, when we can objectively look back and we can see where we were in our going forth. Oh yeah, and from over here you can say, oh yes, I was there. And as we've talked about in the past, and the closer it gets, the more subjective becomes our understanding of what's going on. This number 2, the objectivity to the foundation, since we and looking at man and going back to the origin. So we are the foundation. Now, instead of going this way, which we can do, go forward and progress, we'll progress to 13, but we can also look back to the origin and get ourselves back to the origin, back to the core, back to who we are, to the quick. And that goes through the same cycles, only just going in that direction. So we have some objectivity when we look backwards. We see the druk, the number 11, the reflection of the foundation, the replication of the foundation. We can see that with a more objective eye than when we're actually involved in experiencing it, the condition of 11. And the same with when we get to 10, that would be the synthesis. So, because it's the third condition, man being the foundation, the second one being 11, and the third one then being Susa, which is the complete, the good and the bad together. And so a man then has to learn how to synthesize that in order to progress further toward the origin. And so then he comes to the next condition, which is Eloi, which is the sustainer of the good. Yeah, so it's a lot of work, and it's a huge task. And yet it's not all demanded of us that we do it all at once, or that we can choose to either not go back there for as long as we want, but ultimately we have a desire to get back to our roots, to our beginning, to what we are inside. And that's a way of doing it. And we can do it so superficially too, to some extent. You know, we can objectively look at the druk situation, and we can philosophize or whatever and about it and consider it and all that stuff, and then move on to how you deal with the problem of good and evil in the world and all that, and in the milieu and in the surroundings and in oneself. Now, one can certainly do something about good and evil within oneself. One may be limited in reach insofar as helping the outside world change. But as far as the inside world, inside it, ourselves, our inner temple, our inner condition that we have for a home for our spirit and for our soul, when we deal with that, yes, we can certainly deal with that and purify it and cleanse it and clarify it. That we can do, and it's up to us to decide how much we're going to do and how much and when and all that. If we want to go back to origin, then we can progress backwards, like we say, and we can do it intellectually, pretty much, because that's what we're doing now. Is we're kind of intellectually going backwards and back toward origin, and that helps because it actually creates a thread or a pathway through that. That's what we're doing now. Is we're kind of intellectually going backwards and back toward origin, and that helps because it actually creates a thread or a pathway through that, and so that when a person wants to go through it again, they can broaden the pathway, they can expand the understandings and the growth that's occurring, and the mastery that comes with all these situations. Because the fourth condition has to do with harmony, and it has to do with integration, has to do with oneness, wholeness. That's what we need to do with regard to Eloi when we work our way back toward the origin. So we have to understand that what the Creator is doing, because Eloi is another name for the Creator, what the Creator is doing is sustaining the good for all, for everything. So we might not be able to perceive his wisdom at the time as to why he chose to sustain certain things and allow certain things to go on their own and destroy themselves. That's entirely his business, so to speak. He doesn't cut us out from that. We can certainly tune in to that and figure it out and find it out, but we have to work toward that. We have to take the steps toward that. Our desire for it is a good start, but the actual labor involved in order to get there has to be done. And part of that labor is sacrifice. We have to sacrifice self for the good, for the betterment of your person, of who you really are inside. Because the beast part of you might not give two hoots about the spiritual part, because the beast in you, it wants to get fed, and it wants to have instant gratification. It wants to have these things here now, and it wants to demand things and control things and be a director, and just all the things that what we don't need as far as food for the spirit and food for the soul. Those things we need to deal with. And so in this little talk right now, I'm not going to go back any further than that toward origin, because you can probably work your way back from there, from the start that we've given there. We are going to touch more upon this, but we're going to look at it in a slightly different approach. Because as we mentioned, not only can we go backwards, or forward, but we go backwards, but we can go forward, but we need not start with man as the foundation. We can start anywhere in any of those conditions and use it as our foundation, and understand that condition better in that way too, and understand ourselves better in relationship to that condition. I'll give you an example of this. So instead of having the foundation as Ah, let's have the cosmos as our foundation. Number 4, Isek. That's the line circle with the horizon. So where is man in relationship to the cosmos? Because that's where you will be in relationship to the cosmos as well. And so we find that cosmos is number 4 and number 12 is man. Well, the difference between them is 8 according to our mathematics, arithmetic. If you subtract 4 from 12, you get an answer of 8. And that's right if you're doing counting. But remember, we talked back in the very beginning of this series, we talked about how number was 2 things. It was count and it was measurement. Yes, we're counting. We're counting 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and there's 8 of them. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's 8. But 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 5 is not our foundation. 4 is our foundation, because we're starting with 4. So that means that to go from 4 to 12, the measure started, because remember the measure starts way back at the beginning of your, at the 0 point, at the starting point, which the starting point in this case is 4. And so going forward from there to 12, there's actually 9 stations involved. 4 becomes, number 4, the Isek, becomes the foundation. Number 5 becomes the O to that foundation, the objectivity of the Isek, of the it's the rise from the Isek, and 5 is the Ieo, the rise, the elevator, the up and the down, because yes, the rise, but it can also be descent. So we can go forward from there, and so we find that for the cosmos, the objectivity with regard to the cosmos can be found in the 5th condition. And the 5th condition being Ieo. Well, that may or may not make much sense, but if we count all the way up from Isek to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 12 being the 9th condition, the 9th cycle of starting from Isek. Okay, that means, what that means is that 9 is the sustaining of the good, recall, because that was in the foundation. Look, of the conditions, of the cycles, of the symbols, Samoin, symbols, foundation, the explanation of the universe. We start with 1, A, 2, O, 3, Esk, and so forth. All the way up to number 9 is Eloi, who is, we talked about before, is the sustainment of the good. This 9, we just continue, we move it this way, and we see that man, or Gan, number 12, is the 9th condition of Isek as the foundation. And what that means is that it's the responsibility of man to sustain the good that's in the cosmos. That's what that means. Now we can look at man in relationship to all the other stations. If we start at that station as the foundation, recall that number 5, Ieo, one of the things that it meant, besides the elevator up and down and all that, is that it represented the inner foundation compared to the outer foundation, which was the Ah. And we talked about that in a previous video with regard to sets of 4, when we went through sets of 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 being the first set, 5, 6, 7, 8 the third set, 9, 10, 11, 12 being the third set. And we talked about how Ieo, the 5th condition, has to do with the inner foundation. We find that using Ieo as the foundation, that man, and recall we're talking about all mankind here, is the 8th condition, the 8th cycle of that foundation. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's 8. 8 means regeneration, among other things. And so it's man's responsibility to regenerate the inner foundation. That's what that means. It falls to us when that's what man does in relationship to Ieo. A man can choose his elevator. He can choose the spot where he wants to go in creation. How high do you want to go? How low do you want to go? Where is the right place, to set your horizons, to set your going forth, to set your ideal, because that's what's coming up next. Number 6 is the ideal. And so we can look at man in relationship to these previous cycles, these previous conditions, these previous stations that man goes through, humanity, that the universe goes through, that reality goes through, and what does it mean in relationship to man. So we can continue doing this. I mean, we can look at number 6, which is the Hoi, which is the circle and the true cross, but then and representing the ideal, the perfect, if we can consider that. But in reality, it often means the create and the Uz, as it says in Oahspe, because man makes mistakes, and so he's not all perfect, and his conception of the all ideal isn't perfect either. And so our perception of all perfect is not going to be perfect, meaning that our Hoi is not going to be perfect. It's going to be, well, depending upon where we are in grade, it will fall somewhere short of that. And we have to, or it can go beyond it, as we mentioned in our previous video as well, that too much of a good thing can be poison as well. So man in relationship to Hoi, he is the 7th cycle of that. Because it goes Hoi, Drew, Eoi, Eloi, Susa, Truk, Gan. That's 7. We're the 7th one. Now what does the 7 mean? Recall that 7, the Drew, means the extremes. It's the drift to the extremes, and you can't go, if you go any further that way, then you start seeing the true cross again, and it's, so you've changed into a different realm, so to speak. So that's the extremes. But it's also, recall that this is the fullness, because you start with the ideal and you drift toward the extremes, toward fullness, and because we're not all perfect, we fall away and we lose things. Things dissipate and all that, and there's a collapse. That's what 7 is, limitations. And it's also very much, then we could say, responsibility. We have, in our relationship to the ideal, is that we ourselves are the limitation of the fullness, or well, we should say the fullness of the ideal is in our own keeping. We determine the limits for our, as far as interior, our own inner self here. We can develop to our heart's content for however long that we want to develop, and we keep moving toward Jehovah, toward the Creator, toward all oneness. But it not only means limitations and all that, but recall what we discussed when you have the collapse and everything, you gain an understanding. You understand, oh yeah, boy, I sure fell short of the ideal there, and what do we have to do and all that, and then things become, you start to see things more objectively, more clearly. You start to see the lacks, essentially, and all that. What did you lack? Why? And so that all has to be, and that's all from this condition of Drew. And so a man in relationship then to the Hoy, to the ideal, is he acts as the fullness of it. The fullness of that ideal is in his own keeping. And the understanding of that ideal is in his own keeping. And it depends upon how clean he is, how pure he is, how clear he is, how wholesome he is. And by he, I mean he or she. You know, the good works that a person does, all these things. So that's in man's keeping. Everyone, every human, every mankind being that there is has that capacity within them to do that, and has indeed the responsibility for that. A person could continue going that way and looking at man in relationship to everything previous to what he is. But it's also possible to that we go forth, not only possible, but we must go forth. We must go forward. And so that means moving on to number 13 and 14 and 15. And what do those stations represent? What do those conditions mean? What is the meaning of those cycles? And as we were saying, you can apply these cycles to anything, and you can predict using these cycles of where a person is in relationship to reality, creation. But there's more to it, of course, than that, because there are cycles within cycles, as we previously mentioned. And so that's all we're going to talk about today. Have a good day.